Hi there. Welcome to day 4 of Foundations. And so today's going to be a learning workout. We're not going to do a workout, so the numbers won't matter as much. But what I wanted to go over was all things squat and all things get up. Well, maybe not all things, but I want to talk about them a little more broadly. A lot of times we think of them as a very specific exercise rather than as a pattern, a movement pattern that has many exercises and applications outside of the one exercise that might come to mind. So we're going to do some of that, but first we're going to do a little shake it loose session in the form of a daily dose. Each one I'm going to put on for 2 minutes, and I might demonstrate a couple of variants on each one. But feel free to stick with the ones that I have been doing or the ones that you did and felt good for you. You don't have to follow everything that I do. All right, let's put some time on. All right, it'll be 2 minutes a set. You'll notice that 2 minutes is a lot different than 1 minute. It's approximately twice as much as 1 minute, approximately, if my math is correct. 10 seconds on, we're starting with hinges. So I like a nice wide stance when I start. Knees soft, I reach my butt back. I'm hinging at my hips, I'm not bending at my back. Keep some tension in your center. You want your back to be like a tabletop as you fold over. I'm also reaching the top of my head away to keep my spine long rather than compressing down. Keeping my spine long, using my strength to hold on to my length. Once you have it, you can start being a little bit more fluid with each rep. Breathing with a lot of these movements, especially when you're warming up, is what's often called anatomical breathing, which means you're breathing with your body, not against it. And in this case, as I'm compressing, I'm going to exhale. So as there's pressure on my diaphragm, I'm breathing out, and then I'm breathing in as I come up. When I'm warming up, my breath is going to be higher. So I want more of a rib-filling breath, lifting my ribs, my lower ribs, rather than just a belly breath. I will save that for when I'm trying to chill out and relax and let go of tension. Here, I'm trying to gather energy. And then the other thing that I'm going to offer today is a circling hinge. So here I'm going to turn to the side and hinge toward one leg and then sweep across to the other side and then come up. So I'll just do a couple of these with our remaining time. I can alternate or I keep going in one circle. Good. Then come all the way up. Hands down for mountain and valley. To making a nice tall plank, active scaps. Pulling myself up with my legs into mountain. And then pressing away from the floor, not hanging inside of my arms, but pressing away and getting long into my valley. I'm also using a little pressure to push myself back into my feet. So now if I wanted to add a little rotation here, one way of doing that is as I come back, I'm going to reach one arm across to the opposite side and then bring it back to support and then reach across. And I'm trying to reach with my whole body. So it's not just moving my hand back, but I'm rotating my whole body in my positions of support here. Good. Then we'll come back up for rolling squats. Feet about hip width apart. Arms sweep back to start the movement. And then I squat down. I don't hinge down. Squat down. Arms scoop. And then everything comes together at top. Here too, my breath. Exhale. Inhale as I stand. Exhale as I compress. Inhale as I stand. The nature of these is very rhythmic. So once you find your rhythm, you can make things a little more fluid. And don't try to be fast about it. But if you can link the movements more smoothly, you'll end up going a little faster. And I want to feel my springs loading and unloading, loading and unloading. So it's not a high tension movement. Think more easy power. Just letting your body do the work. And now I can add circles here too, by reaching off to one side, circling around on top, and then continuing. When I circle with my arms, I'm emphasizing circling my elbows. Because if I'm bringing my elbow across my center line, then I have to rotate. If I'm just bringing my arms around, then I'm just doing a dance from the 90s. All right, back roll and lunges. And then today, I'm going to plant two hands. I'm going to reach my leg out long behind me. Let me do a little transition roll. So as I come up, I'm going to plant two hands. Ultimately, it doesn't need to be two hands, but you might start with that. Then see, I'm reaching my leg nice and long behind and then pulling it back up. Roll back. Plant. Reach. And I might ultimately get to just one hand. I'm still trying to lift my ribs here to pull away from my hip on that rear leg. So here's my taut line here is right from hip flexor up into my torso. Back to the center, eagle squats. So I'm feeling a little creaky today. I'm going to stick with my squat block. Arms back, butt back. Find your hammies first and bring your flat spine as low as you can before dropping your butt down. Then bringing your wings around in front, joining them, and then pressing out. As you sit down, you're sitting inside of your legs, not on top of your legs. So notice how I go to the outside edge of my foot. And my knees go outward. And I make space and I sit inside. Some people refer to it as a squat pocket. We'll talk more about this later, but those who are not ready to squat deep, squat wide. So here, probably the eagle squat isn't the best way to do this, but if you take a wide stance, so horse stance, and work on staying back into your heels and then sitting down, it's a way of working on your squat and working on a little bit of the same squat mechanics without overusing your knees. Now, if you're familiar with horse stance from other traditions, a lot of times horse stance, you keep your butt inside of your heels and then your knees come forward. Absolutely fine if your knees are okay with that. Now, there are a lot of traditional martial artists who will, whose knees will say otherwise, but it's okay to have your knees come forward. It's also okay to sit back into your heels. And notice that I'm still making that same squat angle. So I'm sitting back and keeping my knees more forward, and I'm allowing my center to fold forward with the squat. We'll talk more about that later. We got to hang. We don't want to lose some hang time. So grab a piece of wall. Dangle here means moving around, drawing different angles. I'm going to grab my 2x4. So when you got something like a 2-minute set of hanging, okay to shake it out. Unless you're a semi-professional rock climber or gymnast, or spend an inordinate amount of your time doing fitnessy stuff, hanging for 2 minutes is a big ask. So just shake it out a little bit and then come back. Pivot lunge. So go back to that wide horse stance and then shifting side to side. Allow your feet to pivot, so don't try to keep your feet fixed. Turn one over, hip turns over. I'm pointing all the way in one direction, and hips and feet are pointing all the way in the other direction. If you really want to save time, you can say hips and feet together by saying heat. I can't imagine there would be any confusion that would arise from that. And then I'm going to drop down a little bit lower here for a few reps and come forward and say hi to my hips a little bit. Bring your legs back together. Last one are straight arm swings. So I'm going to grab my little 10-pounder. Again, when you're throwing weights like this, my goal isn't to try to tax my shoulder more. My goal is to create more traction, not tension, traction and momentum. So that the challenge is on the eccentric part where I'm elongating in the movement, not on the concentric where I'm lifting it up. So I'm not trying to do some circular shoulder raise. Notice I'm using my center. I'm using my shifting of root here to create a pendulum. Switch to my other arm. Shake that business out. All right, daily dose is done. Good job. Got a little heat. Definitely got a little energy going. So we're going to switch over to talking about some squats. Having a light weight on hand of any sort is a great thing. So we've already talked about the eagle squat, which is a great warm-up and a great range of strength exercise. It's a dynamic range of strength exercise. And if you recall, range of strength is just a definition of flexibility. I use it as a term, as a replacement range. It's a replacement for flexibility or mobility because it describes what you're trying to build, which is the ability to express and control your movement through fuller ranges. So eagle squat is a nice way of saying hi to our deep squat. So we preload the posterior chain muscles along the backside line and get them preloaded before we drop down and compress into our squat position and then come back out. For a lot of people, make it easier to sit deeper by making your hips flex first before you start flexing your knees and your ankles. Versus the traditional air squat style where you just start sitting down here. You might find you hit your wall if you have tight hips like me, or like me, you were for a great period of your athletic career, a locomotive athlete, running, cycling, rowing. My hips just, they're not they didn't do a lot of that in the earlier stages. So now I'm asking to do a lot of that in later stages. Anyway, eagle squat is a great way of warming up, of doing some reps before doing deep holds of any sort down in the squat. And then there's exercises you can do once you're in the bottom position as well. But using eagle squat is sort of the entry into all of that work, or as its own exercise for helping to melt your hips open a little bit. Is a great way to start. Boulder, we did a bunch of these yesterday in the last session. So the Boulder hold, a little reminder, is holding the belly of the bell, or whatever the weight is. You might refer to this as a boulder too. A lot of people call this a goblet hold, but they're just names. Movement matters most, not people's marketing of it. But holding it as a little stone, maybe if I grab the bigger one, it'll look more boulder-like. And then here, I'm carrying the weight and trying to put structure underneath it rather than having the weight way out in front of me or dangling. A lot of times I'll see this hold. This will primarily tax your arms and your shoulders. So that's going to poop out before anything else. But with our squats and boulder hold, let's try a few reps. Get a nice way if you're have a little soreness from yesterday. A nice way to say hi to that soreness is a hair of the dog. So a little bit of the same movement, not with the same intensity, not with the same load, not with speed, but do some dynamic movement through those ranges in the exact same pattern that created the soreness or a little bit of the stiffness. Don't be afraid of soreness. Don't be afraid of being a little stiff. We are not meant to be fluid and mobile all the time, every single day, every single moment. If that's the goal, you're chasing a red herring, you will be sore. You'll be stiff sometimes, and it's okay. Just use movement, gentle, breath-led movement to help flush that out. So, and a little reminder, when we're talking about boulder hold, I'll grab my favorite little rock here. Rocks make such great weights. So notice I'm holding it in the same way I held the belly of the bell. So you can make your boulder squat an actual boulder squat. That's fun, isn't it? All right, so I think I might have touched on this, maybe just with some words yesterday, but rack position. So when you carry a bell in rack position, you come out of this chimp grip, where I'm holding with my fingers, make a little hook with my fingers, and I can use my thumb as a trap. The lifters, if you're familiar with this sort of like hook grip, this lock grip, doesn't work so well with kettlebells, and it's not necessary because kettlebells are never going to, you want, shouldn't say never, but what you want is the ability to move, your hand to move and change shapes when you're doing stuff with it. So here's a good example. I go from my chimp grip here, this quasi hook grip, and then I roll my hand through the handle, and then I pick up what's really a false grip. Because I'm not crushing the handle here. The weight is just racked on my arm. Maybe I get a little closer, it'll be easier to see. So I make a little pocket, and the weight sits in that little pocket. So many pockets today. Sits right there. And then the weight is resting along the heel of my hand, the back of my hand, and then just a little touch in the bottom of my wrist. Right on the ulnar area of my wrist, the bottom bone of my wrist. So that's rack. When we squat, using that rack, my goal is to try to keep the weight on top of my body. Same thing with the boulder. I want the weight to be up high, and I want to sit underneath it. So I need a really strong brace in my abs. Notice I'm also using what I call a cradle. So rack and cradle, something available to me when I'm racking just one bell. This helps me keep the weight in close. Now, in close doesn't mean hugging it into and keeping my arms sucked in, so that, notice what happens here is that the bell, I'm hugging it, holding it in. In close means as I come down, as my butt goes back and I change my shape into my squat stance, I'm going to roll the weight up my shoulder and then bring my arms back at the top. So my shoulder is going to do just a little bit of this flexion, lifting to keep the weight on top of my torso, rather than hugging it in close and then fighting it. So that's rack. Double rack. With single rack, you don't need to know the kettlebell clean. With double rack, it's really awkward to get these up. So this is why learning how to do a little weightlifting is so important, because it opens up so many other things that you can do, especially with a tool like a kettlebell. So if I want to double rack it though, I can't just sort of meatball the thing into place. I have to throw them into place. And the double rack, normally you double rack with the same weight, equal. Great variation though is to practice with two different weights. So here I have a 24 and a 16. So if you really want to play with things and require a lot more core stabilization, racking two different weights is a nice way to play with that. Again, with a movement like this, we're not working on absolute maximal loads. We're working a lot with movement failure and doing more reps and more volume, rather than doing like a 1 rep max. It's just not the tool for that. So we got eagle squat, body weight squat, then our first weighted squat, Boulder. And our first rack squat is a single arm rack, and then double arm rack. Now, for everyone whose knees are screaming at them, or who's sitting and drinking a coffee and just watching this because they know their knees are going to scream. There are other ways to squat. And the first one, so we're talking bilateral. It means 2 feet square versus unilateral, 1 foot as the dominant. First thing we're going to talk about is going back to that horse stance. So I also don't need to. There may be some other things going on that make it hard to rack. Maybe there's some back issues. But I can do a hanging squat where I just hang the bell in between my stance, strong center. And then here I'm trying to work my knees going outward, and they track with the direction of my foot. And I can do a nice wide squat. Now, if you watch me from the side, notice that I'm sitting my butt back and down. Notice that I'm allowing an angle in my back. Again, absolutely fine if you learn from a yoga tradition with a tailbone tuck, and then you sit perfectly vertical on top of your legs. A lot of traditional martial arts have something similar. Totally fine. But if your knees aren't feeling it, or if you've done so much of that that your knees have gathered a little mileage, it's okay to give yourself permission to sit back into your hips. There was a time when I did traditional martial arts, I never had knee problems as a runner or a cyclist, a rower or weightlifter. But there was a time when I started wearing a knee brace, and I couldn't figure it out at the time. I wasn't thinking about these things, but I had to start wearing a knee brace because my knee started hurting. So all of my practices, I was wearing a knee brace until I decided to apply a little bit of thought about what was going on. You can brace your knee just by changing. Again, this comes up again and again. pressure in the foot. So if you're loading pressure into the forefoot, that means you're loading the knee. If you're loading pressure into the heel, you're going to be putting it in the hip. So heels and hips, toes and knees. Heels and hips, toes and knees. And this is why when you walk upstairs or go uphill and you're just pressing into the forefoot, your knee starts to get fried from that. You can give it a break by pushing into the heel to bring yourself up. Butt brings you up. Last few things about squats is if you think about squat as a pattern, not just an exercise with 2 feet, knees going out and whatever weight. Squatting is really just raising and lowering your center of mass using your legs. So instead of bending over and then standing up like a hinge, squat uses hips and knees and some ankle to raise and lower up and down. So this is more like elevator versus a pivot arm going on. It's the difference between squatting and hinging. Also means that things like lunges are squat-like. They're a little more pushy than pulley. Single leg, you have single leg squats. So that might be, single leg body weight squats. I'm doing top position, doing half squats to about a half, but you also have the bottom squats, full pistols. Pistol is like you get down to this crouch position, and then you bring, 1 foot out and press out of it. I'm close. I have been close to getting it, but I've never actually gotten a full pistol without having my little heel riser. That's the only way I've ever been able to do it. But you can, live a long and fruitful life without ever doing a pistol squat. Curtsy is another one. So in Kung Fu, we had different names for a lot of these stances. And I'm sure if you come from, a different movement, dance movement tradition or yogic movement tradition, they have different names for all of this. But again, it's just marketing. There's no definitive name for, doing this stuff. Somebody make up a name for this. I'm going to cross over. This is my anchor leg, and this is a kickstand leg. So a lot of times I use the terms root and kickstand. Root leg, and this one's just here for balance. Kickstand. Crossing over. These can be loaded. Be gentle with this. So you're loading up a lot of tension just by the twist before you start flexing those joints. They already have a little torque in them because of the twist. So I can stay on the closer side. I can also start to reach one leg out further and deeper and do a little bit more active range work. But curtsies would fall under squats. A lot of times when we get really deep on that curtsy, I call this position pretzel, or this stance pretzel. This will come into play a little later as well. So squats. Anyway, there's lots of different variants within those lunges. There are step ups as well. Lots of things that you can do under the umbrella pattern of squat, and a lot of options for programming the lower body. Really, again, more whole body movement of squatting. Let's move on. Get ups. So if you had seen shoes used, I like a foam block here, the best. This is a nice way of practicing a little bit of fine motor movement, a little bit, in the midst of all the gross motor movement that most exercise focuses on. But here, I'm also going to work on some structure. So I'm making a balance position. And a lot of times it comes down to how good your fist is. So I'm balancing this on my 3 knuckles. So it's more like some traditional martial arts have these sort of like vertical cannon fists. Wing Chun people know what I'm talking about. but I'm loading on these ones instead of my boxer fists on the front two knuckles. Anyway, 3 knuckles gives me a little more balance than 2. And if you haven't made a fist before, you got to curl your fingers in and then close them up with the thumb. Don't do that. Just like that. If you trap your thumb in there, it'll take approximately 14 seconds off of your lifespan. That's how serious it is. All right. So, strong center. When I come up from my get up, first thing I want to do is roll to the side. So I'm going to use a lot of sideline here at the beginning. And now my ceiling isn't going to let me step all the way up, so I have to bring my arm down in order to finish that movement. So here's the fun thing about the block. I have a little bit harder position, and I have a harder position still. You get the idea. So blocks are a great way of warming up or practicing, just practicing the lines of the get up. But let's talk about the get up itself. So a lot of people teach this as a very, very specific exercise, and they will precisely guide every body part into a standard shape that it has to reach and get into. Cool, that's great. And there's lots of value in being super precise with a body. Problem is not all bodies move to anyone's standard. So giving yourself permission to be a little bit more fluid and moving around principles, not a very rigid prescription, is okay. Totally okay. I don't know. I think I've been doing get-ups for 15 years and my body hasn't. I haven't lost 14 seconds of my life every time I didn't subscribe to someone else's prescription for how to move my body. At least I don't know. Maybe it has. Maybe it will all come. I'll have to pay down the road. But so far, so good. You have 2 options. You have your overhead. Hi. You have your overhead positions for get up. This is normally the way we see people doing super impressive things, holding very heavy, awkward weights overhead and then getting up off of the ground, transitioning to a stand. I love doing a racked get up. This is totally fine to do as well. This will train a lot more of everything else versus just the overhead stability. That will be the weak link in the chain when your arm's extended. But here, the hardest part about here is keeping the weight on your side during this transition. When I go from seated to kneeling, I got to keep the weight on the side of my body. If I keep it in the front of my body, it's going to want to dump. So if I put it on the side of my body, I just open up my shoulder to the side. Then I can bring it back around the front and then finish up at a stand. I'm stepping backwards so I don't cut my head off every time I stand up. So that's a rack to get up. Let's try one on the other side. And there's our get up and get down. So get ups, some variant of that is the way they're usually practiced. They're often referred to as a Turkish get up. I only know one person from Turkey, and they'd never heard of it. I tend to shy away from using faux exoticism to sell movements. So I don't use, just like with rolling squat, I don't say utek, bitek, to use some like poorly pronounced Sanskrit, a language I don't speak. I use rolling squat. Same thing with get up. I just call them get ups. I don't know how many people in Turkey are doing these, wrestlers or otherwise. So easier just to call them get ups. Great exercise no matter what you call them. The thing is, there's other ways to get up off of the ground. There's not just this one way of getting up off of the ground. I've seen videos of people saying like, look how functional I am. And then they do like an exact get up with some other object. I don't know if I would ever do that. I mean, I'm glad you're finding applications for your prescription. But let's play with some variants of getting up off of the ground, even with a weight. So the first one is going to be a side sit get up. So here, instead of coming up to that half sit position here, I'm going to come all the way up to a side sit position. So both my legs and both my knees are down. And then strong center, rah, I'm going to come up onto my knees, and then I can bring them forward up to a stand. I'm not going to finish the stand, but I'm going to come back down. So it gives your hips some good strength line work along the inside-outside lines, your adductors and all of your abductors of your hips for side sit. Then the other one, squat. So we can put squats in here too. I mean, there's a little bit of a lunge at the end, but we can put a full two-legged squat into the middle. Let's do the other side here. When I come up here, now some people who have really, really deep squats might not need this extra assistance. I need a little support hand back here to get my other leg into position, and then I squat up. So I come back. I'm going to squat myself down. I'm going to place this hand to help my transition. Might not need it. Use it if you do. And there's a squatting get up. And then, finally, pretzel get up. You might want to try this one with me without a weight. Let's start just from a seated position. Of course, I'm going to do some kind of sit up to get here, but from seated, I'm going to cross one leg over the other. And then I'm going to turn myself over into my lunge and come up. You're going to ask an awful lot of your shoulder. So if your shoulder in these side positions of support, so a lot of times shoulders with rotator cuff business or other business doesn't have a ton of problem here, but soon as they go out to the side or around to the back positions, this is where all the junk gets noticeable. So if that's you, you can keep it racked, you can keep it in close. You don't have to reach your arm way out to the side. But a pretzel get up, demo. I'll try this one overhead. So I'll come up the same way. I'm doing kind of like a vampire sit up. I'm going to plant hand behind me. I'm going to bring my foot over. I'm going to keep an eye on that weight just so it's where I want it and not where I don't want it. And then come into my lunge. Back up to a stand. I'll rack it so I don't bang into the ceiling of the muscle house. So a side sit get up. I didn't talk about double get ups. They're pretty cool, but you probably need to either use. I'm sorry, that was a pretzel. Use a side sit or a squat get up if you have the mobility for it. That's actually really, really tough. Probably just a side sit. But you can double rack your bells. And once you get to this position, this is the way it's done. Both come together. And absolutely, I've seen really impressive feats of strength with people doing side sit get-ups with two weights overhead, all the way up and all the way down. Super impressive. That's awesome. Anyway, that's it. So today we talked about squats and get-ups. Tried a few different variants of them. We did a longer daily dose with 2-minute sets of everything. Tomorrow, the next session will be a workout. It's going to be stamina focused tomorrow. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it will be not that your heart isn't pumping and sweat isn't beating every time you move your body with the right amount of intensity, but tomorrow that will be the focus after movement. Movement always matters most. So one thing when it comes to any form of cardio or stamina, I don't know how many times I've heard doing such and such is such a great workout. And by great workout, they meant they like breathed really hard and sweat a lot. That's a response to working out. That isn't the workout. And what matters more is what you did to create the breath and the sweat. That's way more valuable than the breath and the sweat, than the output, the input of the movement that you did to have that happen. So whenever I hear that, I'm always like, all right, that's great. Yay. I'm so glad you got a great workout from, doing whatever. But movement matters most. So how you move and what movements you're using to get all of these training responses matters more than the training responses in the long run anyway. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. I look forward to moving with you tomorrow.